This story scared the hell out of us. If we ever thought Airbnb was just a convenient service for travelers, now we're not so sure we'll ever use it again. Listen to the chilling story shared by someone named Alex. A story that will make you think twice before booking your next stay. I booked the Airbnb on impulse. I was burned out, sick of the constant noise of the city, the endless notifications, the feeling that I was suffocating inside my own life. I needed to get away, just for a weekend. No emails, no social media, no one expecting anything from me. Just silence. The listing seemed perfect. Cozy, remote cabin for a peaceful retreat. The photos showed a small but modern space tucked deep in the woods, a stone fireplace, a clean kitchen, a lofted bedroom. The price was surprisingly cheap, almost too cheap. The only thing that gave me pause was the lack of reviews. There were a few, but they were vague. Things like great location, very peaceful, and nice stay, will visit again. No details, no long descriptions of the experience, nothing specific. Just generic, empty comments. But I ignored it. I booked it for 2 nights. The host responded immediately. "Yes, it's available. I'll send you the check-in details." That was it. No small talk, no welcome message. Just a mechanical response, almost like an automated bot. A little weird, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get away. The drive took longer than expected. The first half was easy, wide highways, familiar routes, but the last hour was different. The road narrowed into a twisting, single-lane path surrounded by endless trees. My GPS flickered a few times, struggling to keep up. Then, just as the signal dropped completely, I reached the driveway. The cabin stood at the end of a gravel path, just like the pictures. It looked too perfect. That was the first thing that unsettled me. The place didn't look lived in, not in the way an Airbnb should. There were no signs of wear, no car tracks in the driveway, no footprints on the porch, no weathering on the wooden steps. Everything looked like it had been freshly cleaned, like it had been waiting for me. A key was supposed to be waiting under a potted plant by the front door. I bent down and found it immediately, exactly where the host had said it would be. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, and the first thing I noticed was the note. A single sheet of paper sat on the kitchen counter. No welcome packet, no instructions for the Wi-Fi, no guide on how to use the fireplace. Just one sentence, written in precise, deliberate handwriting. "Enjoy your stay. Don't move anything." That was the second thing that unsettled me. I read it twice, then set it down carefully. Something about the wording, about the way it felt less like a suggestion and more like a warning, made my skin crawl. But I shook it off. I was overthinking. I grabbed my bags, walked through the space. It was small but nice, just like the photos. Clean, organized. Too clean, actually, like a staged home no one had ever actually lived in. The kitchen had plates and utensils, but no food. The fridge was completely empty, not even a stray bottle of ketchup from a past guest. The living room had a couch, a coffee table, and a small, outdated TV. The remote sat perfectly centered on the table, untouched. A guest book sat next to it. I flipped through it absent-mindedly. Most of the pages had been ripped out. The few that remained had only short, strange messages. "First night here. So peaceful. Weird noises last night. Probably just animals. Saw it again last night. Not sure if I'm imagining things." That was it. No dates. No names. Just those scattered entries. A familiar unease settled in my stomach. I told myself it was nothing. Probably just guests messing around, trying to spook the next person staying here. I closed the book and walked upstairs. The lofted bedroom was simple. A queen-size bed, a nightstand, a small closet. A single window looked out into the trees. The view was endless, nothing but dark woods stretching as far as I could see. I set my bag down and pulled out my phone. No signal. I expected that. The host had mentioned Wi-Fi in the listing, so I went to check. The router was in the corner of the living room, its small light blinking steadily. I connected. At least that worked. I sent a quick message to my best friend, just letting him know I made it. Then I noticed something strange. There was a door at the end of the hallway that hadn't been in the listing photos. It was locked. No handle, no keyhole. Just a heavy, wooden door with an old, rusted padlock bolted into place. I stood there for a long moment, staring at it. Something about it felt wrong. Not just out of place. Wrong. I reached out, hesitated, then ran my fingers over the lock. Cold metal. Old. Solid. I stepped back. Maybe it was just a storage space. Maybe the owner kept personal belongings inside. But why wasn't it mentioned in the listing? I forced myself to ignore it and went back to the kitchen. I made a quick dinner, settled onto the couch, and tried to relax. The air inside the cabin felt heavy. Not in a physical way, just something about it felt thick, like it was pressing down on me. I kept glancing at the note on the counter. Don't move anything. Why? What would happen if I did? It was a stupid thought, but I suddenly felt very aware of every little thing I touched, the way I had moved my bag upstairs, the way I had shifted the guest book when I flipped through it. I shook my head and turned on the TV. Static. Just white noise. No channels, no signal. I turned it off immediately. The sun was setting outside now, the trees casting long, skeletal shadows across the porch. The sky was turning that deep blue that signaled the end of the day. I suddenly felt very, very alone. I locked the front door, checked the windows, told myself I was just being paranoid. I went upstairs, slid under the blankets, and pulled my phone off the charger to check my messages one last time. One new text. From the host. Sleep well. I stared at it, fingers hovering over the screen. I hadn't messaged them all day. Hadn't told them I had arrived safely. Hadn't mentioned anything at all. So how did they know I was here? I didn't reply to the message. I stared at it for a long time, thumb hovering over the screen, trying to decide if I should respond or just ignore it. Maybe it was an automated text. Maybe the host sent the same message to every guest after check-in. But something about it felt wrong. I locked my phone, set it face down on the nightstand, and pulled the blankets up around me. The cabin was dead silent. No cars in the distance. No hum of city life. Just the occasional rustle of wind through the trees outside. I had wanted peace, isolation, but now, lying there in the dark, I realized how exposed I was. How easy it would be for someone to watch me through the window. I tried to shake the thought. I was overthinking things. I closed my eyes, focused on my breathing, and started to drift off. Then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. A soft, deliberate knocking. Not at the door. At the window. I lay completely still, my heart slamming against my ribs. I wasn't imagining it. The sound was rhythmic. 3 slow taps, then nothing. The room was dark, but my eyes had adjusted enough to see the outline of the window against the far wall. I didn't want to look, didn't want to see if something was outside. I stayed frozen, barely breathing, straining my ears. Silence. Maybe it was a tree branch? An animal? I forced myself to sit up, pulse hammering in my throat. The window was right there, just a few feet away. If someone or something was outside, I wouldn't be able to avoid seeing it. I turned my head slowly. Nothing. Just darkness beyond the glass. The faint reflection of my own face staring back at me. I exhaled, the tension in my shoulders easing slightly. Maybe I really had imagined it. The wind was strong outside. Trees shifted all the time. Branches scraped against walls. I reached for my phone. 1:47 a.m. Still no signal. Just the weak glow of Wi-Fi, flickering like it was struggling to hold on. I tapped my messages, debating whether to text the host. Then the TV downstairs turned on. I jerked upright, breath catching in my throat. The sound wasn't loud, just the faint, eerie hum of static. I knew for a fact I hadn't touched the remote before bed. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, my whole body on high alert. My first instinct was to stay put. Whatever was happening, I didn't want to go downstairs and see it up close. But I couldn't ignore it either. I forced myself to stand. My legs felt shaky as I stepped onto the loft floor. The glow from the TV flickered against the walls, illuminating the living room below in ghostly, shifting light. I gripped the railing and peered down. The remote was on the floor, not on the coffee table where I had left it. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. My phone was still in my hand. I tapped out a quick message to the host. I wrote, "The TV just turned on by itself." The response came instantly. "Just ignore it." My stomach twisted. I turned my phone screen off and crept down the stairs, every step making the old wood groan beneath my weight. My fingers hovered over the light switch, but something in my gut told me not to turn it on. I crouched by the coffee table, grabbed the remote, and turned the TV off. Silence. I exhaled slowly. Then I saw it. The chair. It had been tucked neatly under the dining table when I arrived. Now it was pulled out slightly, like someone had just been sitting there. I felt a cold, creeping sensation crawl up my spine. I stood up carefully, trying to convince myself I had somehow moved it earlier without realizing it. I walked to the front door. Still locked. I checked the windows. Still closed. Nothing looked out of place, but something felt wrong, like the cabin itself had shifted slightly. I forced myself to go back upstairs. I shut the bedroom door behind me, locked it, and crawled under the blankets, phone clutched in my hand. The silence felt heavier now, like the entire house was waiting. I turned my phone screen back on. One new message. Not from the host. From an unknown number. "You shouldn't have moved the chair." I sat up, so fast my head spun. My mouth went dry. I stared at the message, rereading it over and over, willing it to disappear. Who sent this? I tapped the number. No caller ID. No profile picture. Just a blank contact. I tried to reply. Message failed to send. I checked my Wi-Fi. The signal was gone. I was completely cut off. I glanced toward the bedroom door. I had locked it, hadn't I? I climbed out of bed and walked over, pressing my palm against the wood. The handle was ice cold. I leaned in, my ear against the door, listening. Silence. Then a quiet sound. Faint, barely audible. A click, like a lock turning. I stepped back. The handle twisted slightly. Someone was trying to open the door. I backed up slowly, heart pounding so hard it was all I could hear. I turned, reaching for my phone again, and then a sharp, deliberate knock. Not at the bedroom door. At the closet. I stopped breathing. The closet door that I knew for a fact I had closed when I first got here. I turned my head, every nerve in my body screaming. The door was slightly open. Just an inch. Just enough to see the darkness inside. Something moved. I ran. Didn't think. Didn't breathe. Just ran. I grabbed my bag, shoved my phone inside, and bolted for the stairs, heart slamming against my ribs. I took the steps two at a time, nearly tripping as I sprinted for the front door. The chair that had been pulled out? It was back in place, like I had never moved it at all. My fingers fumbled with the lock. I yanked the door open and stepped outside, and froze. There were footprints in the dirt, leading from the forest, leading to the front door, but none leading away. I turned, eyes wide, scanning the darkness, the trees, the empty, endless road stretching into the woods. Nothing, but I could feel it. Something was still watching me, waiting. I stepped back inside and slammed the door. I locked it, bolted it, dragged the heaviest chair I could find and wedged it under the handle. I grabbed my phone, breathing hard, and opened my messages. One new text. From the host. Don't open the door again. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone screen, waiting, watching. The last message from the host, "Don't open the door again," kept replaying in my mind over and over. I wanted to believe this was all some elaborate prank. Maybe some locals messing with tourists. Maybe I was overreacting, seeing patterns where there weren't any. But the footprints outside, the chair moving, the closet door, those things weren't my imagination. I was alone out here, wasn't I? I needed to get out. Morning came slow. The sky was a dull, pale gray when I finally stood up and grabbed my things. I stuffed everything into my bag, clothes, toiletries, phone charger, before I realized something. My charger was gone. I checked the nightstand, the outlet, the floor. Nothing. I knew for a fact I had plugged it in before bed, but now it was just gone. I swallowed, stomach tightening. I grabbed my phone, ignoring the fact that the battery was now at 12%, and went downstairs. The cabin was still, empty, but the air felt wrong, like the silence itself was heavier. I walked to the door, grabbed my keys, and swung it open. Then I stopped. The footprints, they were gone. Not covered up, not disturbed, just gone. The dirt outside was smooth, untouched, like no one had ever stepped there at all. I stared for a long moment, my pulse hammering. Then, suddenly my phone buzzed in my pocket. I jumped, heart in my throat. I pulled it out, glancing at the screen. One new message. From the host. I wouldn't worry about that. I almost dropped my phone. I hadn't messaged them. I turned, scanning the trees, the road, the porch. Was someone watching me? I forced myself to breathe, forced my fingers to type out a reply. "Where's my charger?" No response. I shoved my phone in my pocket, grabbed my keys, and went straight to my car. I needed to get the hell out of here. I slid into the driver's seat, shoved the key into the ignition, and turned it. Nothing. Not a sound. I turned the key again, harder this time. The engine didn't even try to start. No clicking. No struggling. Just silence. Panic rose in my chest. I popped the hood, stepped out, and lifted it. The battery was fine. The cables were connected. I wasn't a mechanic, but there was no reason my car shouldn't start. I stood there for a long time, gripping the edge of the hood, trying to calm down. Then I heard it. Soft. Almost too soft. Whispering. Coming from the trees. I turned my head slowly. Nothing. The forest was empty. Just an endless stretch of trees, dark and still. But the whispering was there, just on the edge of hearing. I swallowed hard, slammed the hood shut, and took a deep breath. Okay, the car wasn't working. My phone barely had battery left. I needed to find help. The listing had mentioned a small town about 20 minutes away. If I followed the road, I'd eventually reach something, gas station, house, anything. I grabbed my bag and started walking. The road was silent. The deeper I walked into the trees, the quieter everything became. No wind, no birds, no rustling leaves, just silence. Then after what felt like forever, I saw it. A mailbox, faded, tilted slightly to one side. A narrow dirt path stretched beyond it, leading to a house partially hidden by the trees. I hesitated. The house looked old. The paint was peeling. The windows were clouded with dust. But there was a car in the driveway. Someone lived here. I stepped onto the path and made my way up to the porch. The front door had no bell, just a rusty knocker in the shape of a hand. I lifted it and knocked twice. The sound echoed. Then, silence. I waited. Then, slowly, the door creaked open an inch. A single, wrinkled eye peered out at me. An old woman, frail, unblinking. She stared for a long moment, not saying anything. Then finally she spoke. "You're staying at the cabin?" It wasn't a question. I felt something cold creep up my spine. "Yeah," I said slowly. "My car won't start. I was wondering if you should leave." Her voice was flat, mechanical. I hesitated. "I can't. I don't have any service, and my I know. Her gaze flicked past me, toward the distant tree line, like she was checking for something. Then she shook her head. People don't stay there long. Something about the way she said it made my stomach clench. What do you mean? I asked. She didn't answer, just stared. Then, after a long moment, she said, "Just don't open the door." I frowned. What door? But she was already closing the door. Wait, I said quickly. Can I use your phone? She hesitated, then shook her head. No phone. The door shut. I stood there for a long moment, heart pounding. Then, slowly, I turned and walked back to the road. I didn't look back, but the feeling of being watched followed me all the way back to the cabin. By the time I stepped onto the porch, the sun was already starting to set. The front door was open, just an inch. I knew for a fact I had locked it before I left. My throat went dry. I stepped inside cautiously, my hand gripping my bag strap so tight my knuckles ached. The air was different, stale, heavy. I glanced around. Nothing looked out of place. No signs of a break-in. No footprints on the floor. But then I saw the chair, the same one that had moved before. It was back in the exact position I had left it in when I first arrived. Like I had never touched it at all. Like someone had reset everything. I backed up slowly, my chest tightening. Then I heard it. A quiet sound. Soft. Almost gentle. The closet door upstairs creaking open. I turned toward the staircase, heart slamming against my ribs. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming down the stairs. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Then finally I saw it. A single pale hand reaching around the railing, gripping the wood, pulling something forward. I ran. Didn't think. Didn't breathe. I grabbed my bag, sprinted out the door, and didn't stop until I was halfway down the road. I turned back once. Just once. The cabin was still, but the front door was wide open, like it was waiting for me to come back. I didn't go back inside. Not at first. I stood there in the middle of the dirt road, gasping for breath, staring at the open cabin door like it was some kind of gaping mouth. The trees stretched tall and endless around me, their twisted branches blocking out the last traces of daylight. I should have kept running. I should have forced myself to keep moving, to get as far away from that place as possible. But I didn't, because I knew I couldn't. My car was dead. My phone was dying. The nearest town was miles away, and something about that forest felt wrong. Like the moment I stepped past the tree line, I wouldn't come back. So I did the only thing I could do. I forced myself to turn around, to go back inside. The front door creaked as I stepped over the threshold, the sound stretching out through the still air like it was warning me. I stood there for a long moment, scanning the living room, the couch, the coffee table, the guest book. Everything looked exactly as I had left it, except for the footprints, faint marks in the dust, trailing from the bottom of the stairs to the closet. The closet door was slightly ajar, the same one that had been locked shut the night before. I swallowed hard. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to leave it alone, but my hand was already reaching for the handle. I pulled the door open, and behind it, a wall, just a blank wooden panel, like the closet didn't exist at all. I stared, breath caught in my throat. I had seen the inside of that closet before, empty hangers, a single shelf. But now, the space where the back wall should have been was sealed shut. Something was behind it. I ran my fingers along the edges of the wood, searching. There, a seam, the faint outline of a hidden door. I pressed against it. Nothing. Then I noticed the latch. A small, rusted metal hook tucked just out of sight. I hesitated. Every instinct told me not to open it. Then, slowly, I unlatched it. The wall shifted. I stepped back as the panel creaked inward, revealing a dark, narrow space. A hidden room. The smell hit me first. Dusty. Stale. Like something had been left here too long. I fumbled for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and stepped inside. The space was tiny, barely big enough for a bed and a chair. The walls were bare wood, old and splintered. And the bed, it wasn't a real bed, just a thin, rotting mattress on the floor, the fabric torn in places. And next to it, on the ground, a notebook. I crouched down, hands shaking, and picked it up. The pages were worn, edges curling from age. I flipped through it. The handwriting was frantic, messy. I hear it at night, scratching. It moves things when I'm asleep. I saw it today. It looks like me. If you're reading this, it knows you're here. The last page was smeared, the ink bleeding into the paper. I turned to the inside cover, and my stomach dropped. A name was written there. My name. I let the notebook slip from my hands. That wasn't possible. That wasn't possible. This had to be a trick. Someone was messing with me. Had to be. Then I saw something else. Scratches on the walls. Tally marks. Hundreds of them. And above the mattress, written in jagged, uneven letters. Let me out. My breath came in short, uneven gasps. I backed away, nearly tripping over the threshold as I stumbled out of the hidden room. The moment I did, the door slammed shut. I bolted for the front door, nearly ripping it off its hinges as I ran outside. I didn't stop until I was halfway down the road. I stood there, panting, staring at the dark shape of the cabin in the distance. I needed to leave. Now. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking, and opened my messages. One new text. From the host. Did you open it? I didn't respond. I didn't move. I just stared at the screen, heart pounding. Then, another message. You shouldn't have done that. And then, the closet door creaked open again. Even from where I stood on the road, I heard it. The groan of the old wood. Something stepped out. A shape. Tall. Thin. It stood just inside the doorway, watching me. And then, slowly, it took a step forward. I ran. Didn't think. Didn't look back. I sprinted down the road, my breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. My backpack bounced against my shoulders, the weight of it slowing me down, but I didn't dare stop. The trees pressed in around me, their dark shapes twisting in the dim light. The road stretched ahead, empty, endless. No cars, no houses, just me, and the thing I knew was standing in the doorway of that cabin, watching me. I didn't know how long I ran. Minutes, hours. It didn't matter. But then I stopped, because the road had ended. I blinked, chest heaving, trying to process what I was seeing. The dirt path, the one I had followed from the main highway, just stopped. Not faded into grass, not merged into another trail. It just stopped, like the world past this point didn't exist. I turned, pulse hammering in my ears. The road behind me stretched back the way I came, and at the very end of it, the cabin. No, that wasn't possible. I had been running in a straight line. I had felt the burn in my legs, the ache in my chest. I should have been miles away, but I was right back where I started. My breath came in short, panic bursts. No, no, no. This was a trick. Had to be. Some kind of messed up prank. A hallucination. I grabbed my phone, my fingers shaking. 3% battery. I tapped out a message. Me. I need help. I can't leave. Sent. No reply. I turned back toward the cabin. The front door was still open, swinging slightly in the breeze. The porch light flickered. The air smelled thick wrong. And then, from somewhere deep inside the house, a whisper. I gritted my teeth, forcing my body to move. I didn't want to go back inside, but I didn't have a choice. I stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked under my weight. The moment I crossed the threshold, my phone buzzed. A new message. From the host. It's inside now. I stared at the words. A cold, creeping sensation spreading through my chest. The air shifted behind me. Something moved. I turned just in time to see the closet door upstairs slam shut. I backed away, heart hammering. I couldn't stay here. I needed to find another way out. I grabbed the chair by the dining table and wedged it under the front door handle, securing it as best as I could. Then I moved toward the kitchen, searching for something, anything that could help. A knife, a hammer, something. I yanked open a drawer. Empty. Another. Empty. All of them. Empty. Like no one had ever actually lived here. The sound of footsteps echoed above me. Slow. Deliberate. I gripped the edge of the counter, trying to steady myself. Then a thud. Loud. Directly above me. I forced myself to move. I bolted for the back hallway, my eyes locking onto the only other door in the house. The one that had been locked since I arrived. The secret room. I didn't want to open it, but the footsteps were coming down the stairs now. I grabbed the padlock, my fingers fumbling, yanking at it. Locked. I searched the kitchen again, throwing open drawers, yanking at cabinets. There, a pair of rusted scissors, buried in the back of a drawer. Not a key, but sharp enough. I ran back to the door, jamming the blade of the scissors into the lock. Twisted. Pulled. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. I worked faster, my hands slick with sweat. The lock groaned, then snapped. The door swung open. I stumbled inside, slammed it shut behind me. Darkness. I pressed my back against the wood, breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. Outside, the footsteps stopped, right on the other side. Then, the doorknob twisted. Slow. Careful. It didn't rattle, didn't shake, just turned slowly, deliberately. And then, silence. I stayed like that for a long time, back against the door, knife in my hand, every muscle locked in place. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Finally, I forced myself to move. I turned, scanning the room, and that's when I realized where I was. It wasn't a storage space. It was a bedroom, a small, windowless space, barely big enough for a bed and a nightstand. Dust covered every surface. The mattress was old, the blankets pulled up like someone had just been sleeping in them. I stepped forward, my pulse pounding in my ears. Something crunched under my foot. I looked down. Photographs, scattered across the floor. I bent down slowly, picking one up, and then I felt my entire body go cold. Because the photo was of me, standing in this exact cabin, wearing these exact clothes. I grabbed another. And another. Every single one was of me. Some were recent. Some looked older. But they were all the same, me in this cabin in different poses, different expressions. Some of them I didn't remember taking. I turned the last one over. A message was written on the back. You've been here before? My breath caught in my throat. I dropped the photos, stumbling back. This couldn't be real. It wasn't possible. I needed to get out. I turned toward the door and stopped. The handle was turning again, but this time it wasn't slow. It was violent. Something was trying to get in. I backed up, heart racing. I grabbed the nightstand, shoved it against the door. Then the bed. Anything to block it. The pounding started, fists slamming against the wood. I clamped my hands over my ears, my body shaking. Then my phone buzzed. I didn't want to look. But I did. 1% battery. One final message. From the host. It's not locked anymore. The pounding stopped. Silence. Then, a soft creaking sound. The bed shifted, like something was crawling out from underneath. I didn't scream. I didn't breathe. I just ran. I didn't look. Didn't stop. Didn't think. I bolted for the door, yanking it open so hard it nearly ripped off the hinges. My heart slammed against my ribs, the blood in my veins surging with pure panic. The pounding was gone, the whispering, the footsteps, silent. But I knew it was still in there, and I knew it was watching me. I sprinted through the cabin, my footsteps pounding against the floor. The living room was exactly as I had left it, too perfect. The guest book still sat untouched. The chair was back in place, the way it had been when I arrived. Like nothing had ever happened. Like the house was resetting itself. I didn't care. I ran for the front door and stopped. The chair I had wedged under the handle? Gone. The door stood slightly ajar, swaying gently, like someone had just walked through it. I hesitated, my whole body frozen in place. My ears strained, waiting, listening for movement outside. Nothing. Just the wind. The trees shifting. I took a step forward, pushing the door open fully. And the moment I did, my phone buzzed. A single, final message. From the host. You should have stayed inside. I looked up, and that's when I saw it. Something was standing at the edge of the tree line. A tall, thin shape, almost human, but not quite. It didn't move, didn't step forward. It just watched. My breath caught in my throat. Then, it tilted its head, and another shape stepped out of the trees. In another. My vision blurred, my body going completely numb. There were dozens of them, standing still, waiting, watching. Some were barely visible in the shadows. Some were closer, just out of reach of the porch light. And they were all looking at me. I backed up slowly, step by step, my breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. Then, the TV inside flickered back on. The static buzzed through the empty cabin, filling the silence. And from the screen, distorted and crackling, came a voice that sounded exactly like mine. Why did you open the door? I ran. I don't remember how I made it to the road. 1 second, I was sprinting through the trees, branches whipping against my arms and face, my breath coming in sharp gasps. And the next, headlights. A car, blinding light cutting through the darkness. I stumbled onto the pavement, waving my arms frantically. The vehicle screeched to a halt just feet away from me. A man got out, his face twisted in confusion and concern. Jesus, are you okay? I could barely speak. My lungs burned, my body trembled. I turned to look back at the road. The cabin was gone. No trees, no driveway, just an empty stretch of woods stretching into the distance, like it had never been there at all. The man took me to a gas station a few miles down the highway. I must have looked insane, wild-eyed, drenched in sweat, barely able to form a coherent sentence. But he didn't ask many questions. He just let me use his phone to call someone. My friend picked me up 2 hours later. I didn't tell him what happened. I didn't tell anyone, because what was I supposed to say? That I had rented a cabin that didn't exist? That something had been living inside it, watching me, waiting for me to open the door? That it was still out there? That sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I still hear the whispering? I left a review on the Airbnb listing. Just one sentence. Don't stay here. But when I checked back the next day, the listing was gone, like it had never been there at all.